2013. Would you like to lead us in pledge of allegiance?
Yeah,
To the flag
Okay.
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we sit, could I just take a moment for observing what happened in Orlando? Thank you, everyone. Okay. Anyone wishing to address the commission or any
oh,
agenda?
turn on your mic, please.
It says it this one.
I think it's the,
This one?
it's the side of it.
Attention. Is it on now?
I don't know.
It's on. Oh.
Green light on?
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Tech support.
Yeah, tech support, where were we? Anyone wishing to address the commission or any agenda item should fill out the request to speak form and present it to the clerk prior to the completion of the staff presentation. Presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the commission. The commission is provided by law from discussing issues not on the agenda brought to them at this time.
And there are no presentations.
Okay. And consideration of the approval of the minutes of April 11th. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Okay. Presentation and discussion regarding the sewer master plan update.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Vin Kay, Senior Civil Engineer with City of West Sacramento Public Works Department. Let me start off with a little introduction, and then I'll hand it over to our consultant to present the findings of our sewer master plan update. We started this project, kicked off the project on July 18th of 2014. You know, my goal when we started the project was to have a comprehensive sanitary sewer master plan update. Once the project was kicked off, we began, with data gathering, and that required GIS data exchange with our drafting services, who maintains the unit that maintains all the city's engineering data. We had to download and integrate a lot of the SCADA data that was being collected from our various pump stations. Then we follow up with a selection of an appropriate hydraulic model for our sewer collection system. And then we began a pump station analysis that included 14 pump stations throughout the city. We actually went to 8 of the pump stations and inspect them physically. The ones that we didn't inspect were because they were, newer pump stations. And then in early spring of 2015, February 2015, we were actually, crossing our fingers and hoping for wet weather, so we can install flow meters and start measuring what is actually flowing through our systems. Without that information, then we really don't have an idea whether, the model that we're using to produce this master plan is accurate or not. So fortunately, it was a wet winter, and we were able to scramble and get 11 flow meters installed and actually measured, the kind of flows that we were getting at various locations throughout the city. And the purpose of that is, to not just calibrate the model, again, to really see what's happening. Then we follow up with some spot CCTVing of our pipelines throughout the city. Now, keep in mind that it's not feasible for us to inspect every single inch of pipes. So therefore, we selected representative segments of pipes based on, our risk assessment and our condition assessment plan that was developed. Included in this update, we were fortunate enough to receive a planning grant for the Washington District area. Now, in that particular neighborhood, we actually went in and CCTV and cleaned out, all the pipes in there. And we were able to incorporate that information into this sewer master plan. And finally, here we are tonight. We have, some findings, and we have put together a wastewater capital improvement program. And right now, I'd like to hand this off and introduce John Wells from West Yost, whom I've been working with, for the past 2 years to get to this point.
Thank you. Good evening. All right, I can do a sewer master plan. We'll see if I can do the technology here. It's not a slam dunk. I would just like to build a little bit on what Vin talked about in the overall outline of what we did, talk about what the goals of the project were, what we found, what we accomplished, and then there's still some work ongoing, and so we'll talk about that. So we'll go over the project goals. We'll talk about understanding the existing system, and a lot of the stuff that Vin talked about, the inspections and going out, that's understanding the existing system, because if we don't understand what's there now and how it's behaving, figuring out if it's going to work for future growth is impossible. So after we understand the existing system, then we talk about planning for the future system. A lot of what we did is being driven by the 2035 general plan update. So all the work that went into that and figuring out where growth is going to occur goes into us planning for the sewer system. We'll talk about the results, the capital improvement project, the prioritization that Vin talked about, and then we can talk about some of the ongoing activities that are still going on to wrap the project up. All right, so with that, let's talk about the project goals. Vin talked about a comprehensive sewer master plan update. So if you look, everything that we're doing is being driven by the 2035 general plan update. So we know that there's infill that's being planned for that. There's what's called refill. There's continued urbanization, more housing growth, and then there's business opportunities. There's a chance to sort of change the industry and the businesses that are in the city of West Sac. And when we're managing utilities, our number one goal is that the utilities serve both the existing customers and the future customers. You never want to get into a position where you could have new business, you could have new growth, if only you had the utilities to serve them, right? No one ever thinks about the utilities while they're working. They think about them when all of a sudden we can't do a development when they're not working, or suddenly there's sewage in the street because this development was too big. So the general plan update really drove what we're looking at the system to serve. So as I talked about, we spent a lot of time understanding the existing sewer system. A lot of that is in mapping. The number one rule of asset management for any utility is if you don't know where the things are, you don't know what you have, how can you possibly manage that? The city's invested a lot of resources already into building some sewer system collection maps and some GIS, the electronic maps for that. And we worked on improving some of those and field checking and spot checking them. As Vin talked about, we determined the condition of the system, what's actually in the ground and what it looks like. Because you can do all the theoretical and hypothetical planning in the world, but if what you have in the ground is actually not looking good or collapsing, then all your planning doesn't mean much. And then we determined the capacity and we planned for growth. And so in the end, when we talk about this comprehensive sewer master plan, we're talking about a master plan that looks at capacity for growth, it looks at the existing condition, and then it balances both repairing existing deficiencies, making sure the existing system works, with planning for growth at the same time. And that's what we're talking about with that comprehensive sewer master plan update. The scope of work is very straightforward, and it follows exactly what we were talking about. There's field inspection of the collection system. Then there's a capacity assessment of the collection system, and that's the hydraulic model that Vin was talking about. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail. That was a lot of fun for the system. Then there's a risk assessment Because if you had all the money in the world, you would just fix every problem that was discovered all at once, right? But none of us have all the money in the world. So the question is, what problems are we going to prioritize? What problems are we going to spend money on first? And so we do that by deciding on the risk, which problems are actually the biggest risk to the city. And we'll talk a little bit about how we did that. Then we came up with the prioritized capital improvements program, and so that's the list of projects and their priority that the city will be investing on. And then there's the financial analysis and how we're going to fund those activities. All right, come on here. All right, let's talk about understanding the existing system. I told you this was not a slam dunk. All right. I am lucky enough or unlucky enough to work in collection systems every single day, but you folks probably aren't, so I thought we would do just a little bit of Collection System 101 so we can know what we're talking about here. Essentially, we have businesses and we have residences all over the city, and those residences have laterals or private service laterals, which are small lines that are running on the private property from the house or the business to local sewer mains, which are in your streets. And you've all seen the manholes, of course, that the mains run between. And you get enough flow and you have enough private local sewer mains, and those all sort of congregate together into a regional trunk line. And then that goes to a wastewater treatment plant. And in the city's case, you guys don't have a wastewater treatment plant. That's all going to trunk lines that go to regional sand. But you do have, obviously, the residents, the private laterals, the businesses, and then the local gravity mains. And all of this that you see right here, the local sewer mains, they're what we call gravity mains because there's no pressure in there. They're all flowing by gravity. Everything has to flow downhill to get where it's going. And we're going to see on the next slide that can be a challenge in a place that's as flat as the city of West Sacramento. And in that case, then you have to have a lift station or a pump station, which is simply you have things run downhill as far as they can. When you don't have any more downhill, then things have to run into what we call the lift station or the pump station wet well, which is just a storage container. And then there are pumps in there, and the pumps pump through what we call a force main, pump your sewage or your storm, it could be too, but we're talking about sewage in this case, up to the next gravity main, and then everything starts to flow by gravity again. So that's the sort of the 101, and that's what we're going to be talking about in the city's collection system here.
What's the height differential when it does the lift?
In your guys' case, it's not more than 8 to 10 feet, 12 feet in some cases.
Okay.
It's possible to do 30, 40 feet, but
Okay.
but because you're so flat, you're not going over hill or dale or anything like that. You're basically just lifting up to the next step. All right, here we have a figure that's showing the existing system in the city of West Sacramento. So this is everything that we just looked on in that little 101, but this is actually your guys' collection system. So we have gravity mains. Those are the local collectors that the sewer flows into. That is all the green that you're seeing there. All those green lines are gravity mains. There are manholes. We're not showing them there, but every 300 feet or so, there's a manhole, which gives you access to the gravity mains in the streets. There are lift stations, and in the city of West Sacramento, we distinguish a little bit between lift stations and pump stations, although both of them are doing that same thing. The flow goes down as far as it can go, and then we're pumping it up. Lift stations are smaller. They serve a small area, and they're sort of lifting that flow up, and then it's gravitating back down to another area. So we have some what we would call neighborhood lift stations. Then there are pump stations, and those are much bigger facilities. And in West Sacramento, the pump stations are actually gathering a lot of flow, and they're pumping it out to the lower northwest interceptor where it goes to regional. So in your guys' case, lift stations are smaller than pump stations. And you can see that in the black labeling there all around the system, or in the gray it says PS for pump station or lift station. There's the lift stations. There's 14 of them in the system because the system is pretty flat. And then there are force mains, and the force mains are what the pump stations pump into. So it's actually more like a water line. It's actually under pressure. And the force mains in this figure are red. And the city has quite a network of force mains, and a lot of the force mains are interconnected, and the pump stations are interconnected. It's a very complicated pump station system. We'll talk about it a little bit more. That's why this model for the system was fun, but that's why it was difficult, and we had to be pretty sophisticated about it, because that force main network, all those red lines you see there. The pump stations interact with each other, they fight against each other, they don't just sort of act separately. And so it was a challenge in order to model them. There's a pretty big divider here, and I'll just throw this out, because a lot of times we talk about the deep water channel that separates the city between north and south. There's a good portion of the collection system north of that, and then there's a portion of the collection system south of that. We're going to talk about it in more detail, but the southern portion tends to be new development in the Southport area, and then the system to the north is a little bit older. But everything has to get across the channel, come back down south, and then there's a connection to what we call the lower northwest interceptor, a very large 120-inch pipeline that takes all of the city's flow to regional sand for treatment. All right, so the existing system, we're still trying to get to know the existing system here for the city, and so the gravity mains, all those green lines, they're those local gravity mains that are in the street that are collecting stuff, it's flowing downhill. We can't do a television inspection of every single one of them. That would have taken more than the budget for the whole project. So we had to prioritize where are we going to inspect, where's it important. So how do we know where we're going to inspect? And this is part of that risk assessment that we did. So we looked at the age, and the city's GIS had a lot of age information that your guys' folks had already put together for us. In some cases, it didn't have age information, and then we do what we call our Zillow analysis, where we just go on Zillow and we look at when the homes were built, and we say, well, the sewer line, unless it's been improved, was probably put in at the same time of the homes. So we figured out where what the age of the system was, and you can see that it's predominantly newer south of the deep water channel, and then as we get up in the northern areas, there's some areas that are pre-1950s in terms of sewer line age. Obviously, we're going to prioritize those for inspection because those are going to be older, they've been in the ground longer, they're more likely to have problems that we want to find out about. What else do we look at? We look at what your folks who are out working in the system every day say. We say, where are your biggest problems? Where are you spending your time? And so they identified a couple of broad areas where there's a lot of emergency maintenance calls where they know that they have to be out there quite a bit doing extra cleaning and that sort of stuff in the gravity system. So we say those are obviously fairly important. We should be out there. We should be inspecting those as well. Those two things that we just talked about, when you're looking at the age of the system and you're looking at how often people are out there cleaning it, that's what we call sort of probability of failure factors. When we're looking at risk, we look at probability of failure. How likely is this line to cause you a problem? Then the other thing that we look at is the consequence of failure, because not all failure in a sewer system is the same. It's different if you have a spill from your sewer system and it ends up in the street, which of course is bad, but that's one thing. But it ended up immediately in the water and causing a health issue. That's a second thing. And so we look at the consequence of failure too. And one of the things that we look at is the proximity to water. So any sewer lines that are close to water are going to get a higher priority because a failure there means a failure that goes directly into water, means a much more rapid health problem potentially.
When you do that, do you also look at folks that are on well water? So sewer lines that potentially could be contaminating well water.
In this case, we did not look at well water. We looked at surface water of the U.S. because that's the regulated agency, but it's something that could be done in the future to look at that, definitely.
What distance do you consider to be proximate to water? 50 feet, 100 feet?
We did a two-tier analysis. We did things that were crossing directly underneath or were within like a 0, and then we looked at 100 feet, I believe. And so that you end up with 3 tiers. You have the stuff that's directly crossing, the stuff within 100 feet, and then the stuff that's farther away. And then the last thing that we looked at when we were prioritizing where we're going to inspect is public facilities. And we looked at schools and parks because there's going to be a higher consequence of a sewer failure, which is basically an overflow is essentially a failure in that. And so we did the same sort of analysis. How close are they to schools and parks? And we sort of did a buffer on that the same way with 100 feet, and then we identified those gravity mains. And in the end, you overlay all these things together, you give them weighting factors, it's a numerical score, and you can prioritize the system. And so when you look at this map, this is the basic priority we did in order to inspect. The hotter, the warmer the color, the higher the priority for inspection. The cooler the color, the lower the priority. So it won't surprise you to see that there's a lot of cool colors, a lot of greens sort of down in the Southport area. Again, Those are a lot of newer lines. We don't expect to see as many problems. When you look north, there's a lot of colors because you get a lot of warmer colors, higher priority, because you get the combination of older lines that are proximate to water and public facilities, and those need to be inspected. All right. It is not every day around supper time that you get to look at pictures of the sewer lines, but that is exactly what we're going to do today. So what did our inspection show? We prioritized these areas. We tried to find the areas that we thought were going to pose the largest risk to the city, and then we went in and we put a camera in the lines. And so I think the good news is that the majority of inspections show that your guys' gravity collection system is in good shape. It's structurally sound. On the left-hand side here, the picture, you're looking at what clay pipe, a lot of sewer pipe is made out of clay, vitreous clay pipe, VCP. That's a good-looking clay sewer pipe. It's structurally sound. It's got a reasonable amount of flow in it. We don't see cracks. We don't see roots. We don't see a bunch of stuff in there. That's about as fine a clay pipe as you're going to find. And then on the right, that's a plastic-lined pipe. And so that white gray color there is plastic. Again, when you look at that, you see a free-flowing water. You don't see any obstructions. You just see good condition. And the majority of the pipeline, even in these areas which we predicted were going to be the worst or going to be the riskiest for the city, we found are in good shape. And I would say, I don't think I'm a pessimist, but I expected the lines to be in worse shape than they were. So it was a pleasant surprise to see them like we did. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't some problems, and we did find some problem lines. And the biggest ones were in the older area, in what we call, and I assume you guys called it, the State Street areas and some of the areas by Bright. There are some sewer lines that are made out of concrete. It's not resistant to the acids that you find in sewers. And so you see that the acids in there have started to eat the cement out of there, and they're exposing it. And so what you're looking at there when you see that really rough surface is you're looking at the gravel, the aggregate from the concrete that's being exposed in that line, making its structural soundness deteriorate. And then you're actually looking at the bottom there that a piece of the line has actually fallen. So not only is it the line weakening, a piece has fallen and created an obstruction. And so we found in the areas that have the concrete lines, we found that there is some corrosion going on in terms of the structure. And obviously those are, we'll talk about it more with the CIP, but those are prioritized for improvements. While we found a pleasant surprise on the actual condition of the gravity mains, one thing that we did find is that what we call, when we're doing camera work, we look at both the structural condition on one hand and we look at the maintenance condition on the other. And the maintenance resources that are dedicated to a system this size are not keeping up with the maintenance needs probably of the collection system. So the biggest thing that we found on the upper left-hand corner, that's what tree roots look like when they start to travel into a sewer line and they start to restrict the flow. And there were a few root problems throughout the city, but not a ton, but we did see some of them. The biggest thing we found, though, were just silt and sediment, are a lot of silt and sediment in the gravity mains. And so if you look at that bottom picture, that's an example of silt and sediment that is built up over time. And you can see that up until that wall there is something that we had cleaned, and then beyond that it hasn't been cleaned. You're easily losing half of the capacity of that sewer line to sediment and silt at the bottom. So no matter what we model it as or we plan for, you're only getting half of the performance out of it. And so we'll talk about recommendations for that. A couple places, this is just going on. We did these inspections in the middle of August, and we did them on weekend days. So this might be an early Saturday morning or something like that in the middle of August. The crew that was going to go in and do the inspections would open manholes and see that the manhole was already halfway full of sewage. And again, that's just because the capacity of the lines is being taken up by the sediment and by the debris. Looking at some way to increase the resources that are going to the maintenance portion of that is probably something that's going to come out of the sewer master plan, as well as some of the ongoing activities with the things that we're doing. All right, so we talked about the gravity main portion. Those are all the green pipelines that we looked at. Then as Vin talked about, the other thing that we did out in the field was we created inspection forms, and we went out and we inspected 8 of the older pump stations and lift stations in the collection system. And we standardized these forms and actually came up with, again, numerical scores. So this is not just someone writing down, I think this needs to happen, or it would be nice if this happened. This is people rating every different part of the pump station, from the driveway to the gate that provides security to the pumps themselves, on numerical methods, so that we can do comparisons and say, this pump station is worse than that because it scored a 35 and this one scored a 33. And then that also then allows a nice baseline to be developed. So in the future, as the city is growing and doing new things, these same forms can be used for the new pump stations. They can be used to see how pump stations are being improved throughout time. And so we came up with a numeric risk-based assessment of the 14 pump stations. And so you can see here, this is how we like to do, we look at risk for condition assessment. We do this both for gravity mains, but we're showing this here for pump stations. So again, we talked about when we're doing risk assessment, we look at the likelihood at one point, what is the likelihood of something happening that's going to cause a failure, and then we look at the consequence, what actually happens if there's a failure. And so if you're up in that upper left-hand corner where things are green, you have a low likelihood and you have a low consequence, so that's the best performing pump station out of the group, we would say so far. Then as you come down more into yellow, then you're looking at a little bit higher risk, and as you get toward red, then you're getting to the highest risk facilities. And so the upshot of this is that Ironworks Lift Station, which is one of the newest there, is perfectly tuned, great performing station. Obviously, it has the lowest risk. And then there's two small lift stations, the Triangle Lift Station and the Coke Lift Station, that because of their structural condition are prioritized for replacement as soon as possible coming out of the CIP. And then the others sort of fall someplace in between, and so they wouldn't necessarily need to be done tomorrow, but some of them we would be doing in 5 to 10 years, some of them we would be doing 15 to 20 years and further on. Again, all with a numerical score, so we can compare and decide where the best place to spend our money is. All right, flow monitoring. So Vin was talking about sort of the physical things we did. We did the gravity main inspection like we talked about. We did the pump station inspection like we just talked about. Then we went out and we broke the city into 11 basins, and we installed flow meters into the city at 11 different points so that we could measure exactly what the flow is for a couple of months in the system. And the really important thing, and the reason that Vin was talking about all of us having as many fingers and toes crossed as we could, is we want to see how the system performs when it rains. Because when it's dry, all you have is your normal sewage that's coming out of the homes and the businesses. When it rains, some rainwater is going to get in there, and you have to convey the rainwater and get it to treatment without causing a spill. The question for every collection system in the country, the world, wherever, is how much rainwater is coming in? How much rainwater do we have to convey for those peak wet weather times? So we put these, we were weather watchers. We watched the forecast. We said, okay, here's a storm coming. We scrambled. We got the 11 meters out into the collection system, and we actually captured a couple storms. So we got to see how the collection system performed during the rain. So in general, the flow monitoring found the expected customer flows for you guys. It looked a little like the sewer flows as the drought has occurred and there was the economic downturn. Water demand has gone down. Sewer flows per person, per house, per business went down a little bit, not overly much, and we were managed to capture that and see that the flows had decreased a little bit. And what we found was the rainfall that enters the collection system during precipitation, what we call RDII, rainfall dependent inflow and infiltration. I try not to use acronyms, but this one shows up everywhere. Was moderate for a collection system this size. It was certainly not on this isn't the tightest, newest system in the world we've ever seen, but it's not on the order of some of the old systems we see right around the bay or something like that, where it's basically just a storm collection system and everything that hits on the rain is falling into it. So there was moderate response to rainfall, which was a good thing. I just wanted to show an example over here on the right-hand side so you can sort of see one of the things that we're doing. If you look at that lower graph, I know it's complicated and there's a lot of stuff that's sort of going on there, but this is for just site one of the flow meters that we had in there. And you can see on the bottom, there's a repeatable pattern that any sewer modeler in the world will recognize as a good diurnal pattern of people wake up in the morning and their sewer flows increase, and then they go to work and they go down, and then they come back at home at around 6 or 7 and their sewer flows go back up. And so, I can look at a sewer pattern now and I can tell you how residential it is and how early people get out of bed and all that kind of stuff. I don't think you guys want to get to that point, but that's sort of where I am. And then you can see on the upper half, there's the rainfall. So that's actually the rain that's hitting the ground because we put rain gauges in there. And so you can see this nice repeatable pattern, everyone going to work, everyone coming home, all that kind of stuff. The 2 days where the morning peaks are actually higher than the afternoon peaks are weekends. So you can see that that's a Saturday and a Sunday because people tend to sleep in on the weekend. And then you can see that there's the blue coming down in the rain, and then you can see that there's that extra flow on top. So all that extra flow that's over that nice repeating pattern is what's showing up in the rain. And so we have to do a couple of things when we're doing sewer planning. One is we have to make sure that the capacity, that your pipelines and your pump station stuff are big enough to convey that. Or if it's a huge amount, we have to figure out where it's coming in and do things to try and reduce that so you're not conveying as much. So then if you take what we're looking at there in particular and you sort of look at it in general, this is from the people who did the flow monitoring, and this is what they call a heat map. And so it's just, again, the hotter colors mean that there's more rainfall entering the system. And the hottest areas are up north of the Deepwater Channel, and so there's more rain entering the collection system there, and we have to plan more capacity for the rainfall that's entering at that point.
Why is Basin 1 so cool? That's an older section. I would assume that would have a higher.
It is an older section. Although there has been quite a bit of lining up in that section to replace some of the things that were already problems, I believe. And then I don't remember the other. It may just be that there's a better storm system up there that conveying stuff. That's one of the reasons why Basin 9, which is down in the newer area, it's a little bit warmer than you would think, it being newer. But just the way that the topography lays down there and how flat it is, you tend to get more ponding of stormwater, which then ends up in the collection system as well.
So you said that the amount of rainfall entering was moderate, or is it comparable to other systems of this age and in this type of geography, or is?
I would say that it would be comparable, but maybe slightly lower than other systems this age and geography. And I think that the fact that it's slightly, that the amount entering is slightly lower, which is a good thing, I think goes back to the fact that the overall condition of the system looked really good for the portions that we inspected. It's all the cracks and all that kind of stuff that you would find and see that let rainwater in. So if you have a system that looks pretty good from the CCTV, for the most part, you're going to have a system that is fairly resistant to the infiltration as well.
And since we're coming out or are still in 4 years of drought, the few isolated storms we've had in the last year, is that sufficient rainfall to be able to make a really good assessment of this? Or is the expectation that if we get more water and more saturation of the ground that we might see more rainwater entering the system in the future?
That's a great question. And yes, we would always like to calibrate to bigger storms. I think that the rainfall that we saw and we got, and we tried to calibrate at we didn't take the first storms, we tried to calibrate at the end after we had a series of storms to do, like you said, to get some saturation in the ground and establish some background conditions. It's certainly sufficient to calibrate, but I think going forward, if as we come out of that, collection system planning is an ongoing thing, and so I think I would love to get some bigger storms in there and test how the system responds to them. Okay, so that was understanding the existing system. That's everything we did to figure out how the system was operating. And so then that takes us to planning the future system. And so when we're planning for the future system, all the stuff we did before tells us how much sewer flow one household generates, how much each industries are generating, all that kind of stuff. But what we need to know is where are the new households going, where are the new industries going, as part of the general plan. And so this came directly from the folks in planning and the general plan update. And so they gave us information that was basically broken down in a lot of different ways, but it basically gave number of households, number of new single-family dwelling unit equivalents, whatever you want to call it, are going in, and then also the number of new employees that are going in. And so we can look at it different ways, but here, this is a map that I like to use. I've sort of broken it down, both on the left-hand side is by employees, and by the right-hand side is by households. And it's broken down by the old neighborhood designations that you guys use, and that was a sort of a convenient way for us to look at it. And so, again, this is a heat map, so the hotter the color, the more new employees are going into a particular area, and the cooler, then the fewer that are going in there. And so you see, for instance, on the employee side, that we're showing there's a gain of around 29,000 new employees. A lot of them are going into the southern industrial park there at the southern boundary of the channel, and then up into the Triangle Ironworks area. And then for the housing, there's a lot of housing going in Southport, and then again some more housing going in the north too. So this was all driven directly by the planning folks, and they actually created down to the parcel level how many new households, how many new employees are going to be on the parcels. And we use all that kind of stuff in order to drive the assessment of the capacity.
What was the time frame for this?
2015 to 2035. So these are 2035 values. All right, I could spend years on this, but I know that no one would appreciate it. I've been told no one would appreciate it. But I will just say, Vin talked about we had to do the hydraulic model selection. We ended up using a much more sophisticated hydraulic model than you may see used for a system this size. And this is the same model that Regional San uses and that someone like the City of San Jose uses. And again, we ended up using this because of the pump station system and the fact that the pump stations are all interconnected, and they're sharing outlets on the force main. And so what one pump station does affects what the others are doing, and we needed to be able to handle that in a sophisticated way. Hopefully we can see this a little bit, and this is going over what I just said about the pump stations interacting. The top there, we can sort of ignore the bottom figure, but the top figure is just a schematic of all of the pump stations and lift stations that are in the system, and how in the north they all have to run together and then go through a transition structure and then down into a common manifold, and then the pump stations from the south come in and they're all seeing that same common manifold. And so when the Bridge District lift station is on, its performance can be dictated by what the Southport lift station is doing, and vice versa. And so our modeling that changed some of the results that were seen from the 2003 master plan, because that sort of analysis hadn't really been done. And there were some changes that are made to the pump station system, because they were all designed when the city had its own wastewater treatment plant. And then as the wastewater treatment plant was taken offline and things were retrofitted, some of the pumps and pump stations had to be fit a little bit, and there's a little bit of squeezing to make that work so that everything can be taken to the lower Northwest Interceptor. And some of the pumps are not the best matched for that system now, and so we talk about that in the CIP. There's some improvements to be made there. And this is just an example. You guys don't get to see hydraulic models every day, but this is an example of the bottom portion of this. We're looking at a profile. If you were to cut into the ground in the city of West Sacramento, you'd see a profile of what one portion of the collection system looks like. So we're starting at higher elevation up here and running downhill from the left to the right. And the pink line there is basically the top of the gravity main, and then you can see the blue line is actually the water level. This is just what the hydraulic model gives us. This is what we're using as a tool. In a particular area of the system, in the future, under a 10-year design storm, which is what we use, so that peak wet weather flow, you have everything, all the new development in, you put this 10-year design storm in there, and the model says that the level of the sewage flow would actually come up toward the manholes. So that's obviously a violation of your guys' design criteria, and that's where we go in and we develop the new system that would work. So I wanted to emphasize, again, this is the hypothetical future for development and stuff like that. I'm not predicting that anything is spilling right now or anything like that. This is just what we're showing in the future, and this is what we're planning for as part of the CIP. So that in mind, we take all this information we took from the flow monitoring, we learn about the wet weather response, we take all that in, we look at the model, and we look at the system, and what do we see? In general, there is a lot of capacity remaining in the collection system. You're not running out of capacity anytime soon. I think that is a combination of a couple things. One, the drought and the economic downturn sort of stopped sewer flow growth for a while and probably even caused it to go down a little bit. And the second thing is that the design criteria that the city's engineers have used for a long time are very conservative. They're very healthy and leave a lot of room for growth. And so the fact that they've been planning all these years with these conservative numbers means that there's a lot of capacity that's there. And so even with this growth of 28,000 new employees and however many new households that are coming by 2035, we're seeing that there's really only 4 sections of the city that need improvement of the gravity mains. 2 of them are under existing conditions, and then 2 of the projects are just for the future conditions. They're a little bit hard to see on this map, but they're basically the pink lines on Stillwater, on Hardy, one that's running up to the Bright pump station right in the center of the north part of the collection system, and then the inlet line to the Ironworks lift station is undersized in the future as well. This is sort of the capacity of the pump stations. I don't want to spend a lot of time here because it's really pretty technical, and I don't want to bore people. But we're looking at a pump curve, and we're looking at operations. And this is going back to the fact that we said your pump stations were originally designed when you had a wastewater treatment plant. We got to get flow here to the wastewater treatment plant. Oh, now we're going to have a lower northwest interceptor, and so we're going to revise things a little bit. But the bottom line on that is that we're looking at the pump curves, and that it's a combination of how hard the pump has to push and how much flow it's doing. And in a healthy pumping system, all those black X's that are over down to the bottom on the right-hand side, they should be sitting up there right along that blue curve. And we call that when the pump is running on its curve in a healthy way. But it's not. They're all over there to the right, which means that the pumps are running extra fast. They're running a little bit faster than they should. They're not seeing as much pushback as they're expecting. And this comes directly out of the hydraulic model, and it corresponds exactly to what the maintenance people told us about what's happening at the pump stations. Yeah, they're draining really fast. They kick on, and then they drain really fast, and they shut off, and they kick off, and they drain really fast, and they shut off. And so obviously they're working, you're not having spills, it's conveying the flow. But what that's doing is meaning the pumps are not going to last as long. Their useful life is going to be reduced. And so we need a little bit of optimization to match the pumps a little bit better to the head that they're seeing and to their current duty. And so we have that in the CIP for what we're calling pump optimization. So it's not a complete overhaul. We don't need to redo a bunch of the stations and stuff like that, but there may be some replacement, a little bit of change to some of the specific pumps themselves to help them operate a little bit better. All right, so all of this goes together. Everything that we've talked about, the inspection of the existing system, the modeling, the planning for the future system goes together into a CIP. So here is the summarized wastewater CIP broken down by improvement types, and we're showing both the construction cost, which is the basic cost of installation, and then the capital costs, where we mark those projects up to include a contingency, because no project ever goes exactly like you think it's going to, especially at this level of planning. And then we also mark it up for the city's time to administer the project and for inspection and stuff like that. So we inspected and we cleaned a portion of the collection system, and we found that the general condition was good, but there's some cleaning needs, that we had a little bit more resources there. So we developed a CIP item to do more intensive cleaning and inspection of the collection system, and that really should be done over the course of 5 years. It's standard industry practice that you would have the whole system inspected and cleaned every 5 years. So that's been included in there. The GIS shows that there are some gravity mains that are not running in the street. They're running through people's backyards through easements. They're really difficult to clean. They're difficult to access if you have a problem. They're difficult to repair or replace. And so we included a CIP to have those moved from the backyard to the street. And that means that the laterals that we showed, so those people have laterals that are basically running from their house through their backyards. We put the laterals on the other side running to the street and we move it. It's a little more expensive than just your typical project, because you have to deal with individual homeowners, but it's done all the time. The city of Sacramento is doing a big backyard main replacement. Then we have the gravity system rehabilitation and repair CIP. So then this is not for the new capacity. This is not finding bigger pipes or anything like that. This is for those areas that we saw that were the concrete pipes that are corroding, and for other areas that we'll find as you guys do more of the cleaning inspection, those are going to have to be replaced as part of priorities, because those are the biggest risks to the system right now. So that is in the CIP. Then there's the capacity improvements, just the larger pipes that are needed for the new growth at about $2.8 million of construction cost. Although we did not do this analysis, but apparently the wastewater treatment plant is not functioning, but it hasn't been formally abandoned or decommissioned either. And so that is still an item that is going to require capital from the city. And so that's been included in the CIP, so it can be accounted for in funding analysis. And then there's the pump station CIP. And so that is both repairing some of those pump stations, like we talked about the Triangle and the Coke pump stations, which are small and in need of pretty rapid replacement, but then also the fine-tuning, the optimizing of the other pump stations with the pump curves. And so the result is approximately $32 million in construction cost, or $54 million in capital costs, again, between now and 2035.
Sorry, I have a question on, so the first CIP that you had was for a cleaning cost?
Mhm.
Is that a one-time cleaning, or is that actually going through and doing cleaning every 5 years?
That right now, and this comes in from the sewer system management plan, but as well. So there's different ways to do the cleaning. You could either figure out how the city resources might be used, or you can do that on a contract basis. So we simply programmed just the first 5 years of that into that CIP. So, and we did that using what would be contract basis numbers. And so that would essentially be, just from our point of view, just getting sort of caught up to where having everything be inspected and cleaned at one time. So that's just a 5-year. That's not constant over the full 20-year life cycle of the master plan. And it was done on the cost basis was done sort of as like I said, as contract, but that's not saying the city needs to do that. If the city wants to look at its own resources or other ways to do it, that could be done too, but it needs to be done.
And the other costs, this is only considering current problems with the system or anticipated growth that the city is projecting through 2035. It's not including, let's say, the pump stations that are in sort of the medium risk category that we'll probably need to replace in 20 to 30 years, but that's just on the horizon of what we're not considering.
The pump stations that are in the medium, the pump stations, yeah, it is considering those pump stations. The pump stations that are in the medium risk phase, they're put out, we would say they're being done in 2030, for instance, but they are included in that number. The number also has let me go back to it, I'm sorry, if I can. So under the gravity, the one thing that is a little bit uncertain is the gravity system rehabilitation and repair CIP. That includes, there's a combination of things that are included in that. There is, hey, we did inspection of these areas. We found gravity mains that are in condition that need to be replaced. So here's projects in order to do that. But we also know that you guys are going to do more cleaning and inspection, and you're probably going to find more areas that need to be repaired. And we didn't want to leave that out of the CIP because we think that they're coming, even though it's logical to assume that those areas that you inspect are going to have some that need to be replaced, even though we don't know exactly where they are now. And so we programmed in a placeholder for that as part of the CIP, which is sort of future collection system gravity main rehabilitation repair that you're going to discover as you go through and do more of the inspection. But we don't know the exact location of those. All right, so there's two activities going on, and then I will get out of your guys' faces. One of them is the sewer system management plan. That is a regulatory-driven document. It's a document that the state says that you have to do, and it's supposed to be the one binder that serves as your manual for managing the collection system. Now, one part of a sewer system management plan is a capacity plan, and so the whole master plan that you just did will go in as the capacity portion. But then the sewer system management plan looks at a lot more other day-to-day aspects of collection system operation. Are you doing enough preventative maintenance? Do you have the staff to do this? And so we're in the middle of doing that right now, and we're working with Dan, we're working with Vin, and his people, and we're talking about, you know, how many people are actually working on collection system stuff? Is this comparable to what other systems this size have, or is it lower or higher? And looking at all that sort of stuff. And so we're going to develop a sewer system management plan, and by state law, then that will have to go in front of the council to be adopted, and that will have, like we say, a lot of the operation and daily operation stuff in there, more so than just a top-down evaluation of the system. And then the financial analysis is going on right now, and so the financial rate subconsultant has the wastewater CIP, and they're building rate models that look at what the rates will look like going forward in order to accommodate the activities that we have in the CIP. And with that, I've taken a lot of your time, but I invite any other questions that you might have.
I have another question. So you spent a lot of time talking about the gravity mains,
Uh-huh.
but pardon me if I use the wrong terminology for this, but there's also force mains that come out of the pump stations.
Correct.
Did we look at any of those and whether or not they're going to be good for the next 20 years?
That's a great question, and the force mains are, so the good thing about gravity mains is it's easy to get some condition data on them because we can put the camera in there. Force mains are important, but they're much harder in order to actually assess. And so we did not do any direct inspection of the force mains. We know that we just know the force mains essentially based on their age. We do know that there are some, and we have in part of the pump station CIP, there are some valves and stuff like that need to be done that need to be replaced on the force mains. But we don't have a specific CIP for the force mains. Perhaps budgeting for future inspection or something on that would be appropriate.
How old are the force mains?
It varies, but they essentially vary like the gravity mains do. A lot of them they're newer in the southern portion of the system, and some of those are only 10 to 15 years old, and then they probably go through like the gravity mains do, early 60s and stuff like that in the northern portion.
And it's the same general risk of failures for force mains as for gravity mains, and so
It is the same. It would be the same steps that you would look at. Yeah.
When you're, so there's a lot of new growth that's happening in the southern portion of the city,
Mhm.
and that's where the lower northwest interceptor is running through.
Correct.
When you tap into that, are you basically putting new manifolds on there and then feeding new force mains and gravity lines all through that, or, sorry, this is just sort of a general question.
No, it's a great question. I don't know if we can put the map back up. Because this is a great question about how the city works and what we've done.
Is that lower interceptor, that's pressurized, right?
It was designed to be pressurized, but it's not actually flowing under pressure, and that's one of the reasons why the pumps aren't operating exactly as they should. Let me just get back to the map of the system. So right now, there's one intertie between the city's entire system and the lower northwest interceptor. And we didn't spend a lot of detail in looking at this, but there's some interesting situations. So all the way down to the southern portion of the system, there are flows that go to the Largo pump station. They get pumped all the way back up to the north, back up through the Southport pump station, and then back over to that one manifold. So everything's slowing down, then we take it all the way back up, and it goes around and through. And so this is what was called, when the original planning was done, the interim condition. There are plans for not a bunch, but 2 more interties to the lower northwest interceptor. And so in the future, as that develops more, then stuff like that will tie directly into the lower northwest interceptor and won't have to go all the way up and around and through. And that's accounted for in the modeling.
Yep.
But it is kind of funny to watch all the flow come all the way down and then get turned back around.
Does the drought play any part in not flushing the system?
It does.
Just in terms of lower water consumption and
Yes, lower water consumption means sort of lower average daily flows, which means that, that the debris and stuff like that tends to settle a little bit more. Yeah, so the drought has definitely made collection system maintenance here and everywhere in the state.
Does that project it out? Like, I mean, we're projected to continue to be more and more dry. Does that play a part into the planning at all?
It does.
Okay.
And so it's a tough question because, so we're in the drought and people are basically using historically low amounts of water. Maybe they'll talk about it probably more on the water master plan, if I ever give them a chance to get up here. So people are using historically low water, which means that they're generating historically low sewer flows. And so then you got to project 20 or 25 years into the future what they're going to be using. So do you want to use the lowest possible number and say everyone's going to continue to use that? Well, that seems a little bit unreasonable. But are you going to say that everyone, as soon as the drought is over, everyone's going to go back exactly to what they were using before? Well, that seems a little bit unreasonable too. So the planning for the water consumption and for the wastewater generation is sort of splitting the difference on that, knowing that some part of that is going to be permanent, right? Things that when people have new fixtures in and their houses and new low flow showers and low flush toilets and all that kind of stuff, that's permanent. That's probably never coming back. But people being really, really tight about water consumption and then sewer flow as well, probably some of that will change depending on what happens with the drought. And so we kind of try and accommodate for both. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we have the water master plan update.
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners. My name is Derek Goodwin. I'm a civil engineer for the Public Works Department here, and tonight the agenda was a little out of coordination with what I hope to present with you tonight. So as you mentioned, the Water Master Plan will be presented first, and the Urban Water Management Plan will be presented second. They're intertwined together significantly. So what I'll do is if you don't mind, we present them in that order. Thank you. Again, my name is Derek Goodwin, and I am currently in charge of the water master planning portion for the city and also for the urban water management plan. These two water documents are probably the most important documents that we'll be producing for the city in the future. We haven't had a water master plan document update since 2005, and in 2005 is correlated to the 2000 general plan update. So as you know, there's many things that have changed since the general plan 2000 update. In these two plans, the city went through a process of RFP, and we selected Corollo engineers to help us with these analysis to move forward through the past into the present day and into the future. Our consultants were Corollo engineers, and the project manager in charge of the water master plan is Chris Cleveland, and the project manager in charge of the urban water management plan is Nicola Fontaine. So a brief overview of them both, and then I'll let them come up and talk a little bit more detail of them. So the plans, although they deal with water, they're two completely different subjects. The first one is the water master plan. The water master plan is a detailed analysis of our entire water system. The pump stations, the water treatment plant to George Christoph, our force mains, our water tanks, our meters, our CIP projects. That's everything that happens in a day-to-day operations within the city. The general plan needed, in order for the general plan to get going forward, we needed to get the water master plan on its way. There was no way that we could make water projections in a timely manner and even a good predictable manner until we updated our infrastructure model. And when we did that, we now have a GIS-based infrastructure model, which allows us now to project in the future and connect into the new technologies and move forward more dynamically.
Is that tied to the GIS platform or modeling that he was using as well?
Very close systems,
Okay.
very close systems with their GIS modeling, so that way we can actually take small portions and model for them. So if somebody wants to come in and connect, we can now say that little portion, what's going to affect our system versus guessing at a stick model. So the general plan update needed this model to move forward. We provided this model, 3 different models for the general plan. The general plan is now moving forward, and as the general plan projections came back to us, we start moving through with our infrastructure and data collections and move through the water system. We have to coordinate with all the large developments that are under contract, such as Liberty, River Park, and Yarborough developments. And from the past to the current projections, we have to now project for higher density water uses. And so that's how the master plan is changing. What you're going to see tonight also is some very important things like contracts. We have 3 contracts, 3 for surface water contracts with the State Water Regional Control Board, U.S. Bureau of Reclamations, and the North Delta. And it'll get a little bit more in detail, but not too heavy into the contract details. And then we also have groundwater, but we have wells, but we're not currently using them. What you will not hear tonight is the financial impacts or directions, and we'll be bringing that to council for a later topic. But you'll see some numbers that are generated through a CIP on how we need to upgrade the system to move forward for the development and current uses. Also, what you won't be hearing is about the contract negotiations that are going to be going in the beginning of the next year or 2. So the water master plan is the infrastructure. The second presentation will be about the urban water management plan, and that's about the regional connection to California. So we have to collect the data, what we use, what we project, what we use in contracts, and then we have to provide it to the DWR, Department of Water Resources. Department of Water Resources collected this data and then determines who can use the water, how the water is allocated, drought situations, and water rights conversations, and then they dictate how conservation is then going to be played out, and then we have to follow it through the different programs such as WELO, the Water Efficiency Landscape Ordinances, and that nature. So with that, I'll bring up Chris Cleveland, and he'll be discussing the water master plan. So if you have any questions anytime, please feel free.
Good evening. My name is Chris Cleveland with Carollo Engineers, and just want to say thank you to the city for allowing us the opportunity to work with you on this project and also to present here this evening. So should be a presentation for us as well. I will say it's not going to be quite as comprehensive as the sewer because, you know, everyone likes talking sewer water more than water. So because we have 2 presentations and we thought you would want to get home at some point tonight, ours will be a little bit higher level than you heard on the sewer side. Happy to answer any questions. If we don't have the answers immediately, happy to go back and get that information from you or for you. We also have 2 very senior experts here, and these guys that work for the city that know their system better than any consultant could know their system, so they can also provide some assistance in that as well. So we'll start with the purpose of the presentation. We're going to kind of do this in 2 phases. I'll start and talk about the Water Master Plan update. As Derek mentioned, this hasn't been done since 2005. If you remember in 2005, if you were here or anywhere in California, you know what the general plan of that era was like and what the projections showed that we would have, I think, 3 billion people in West Sacramento by now. And we needed to provide infrastructure for that and be ready to invest in the city and provide all this support for all the growth that was happening at the steepest curve anyone had ever imagined. And as soon as we finished that Water Master Plan, of course, in 2006, it went the exact opposite direction, right? And so now that planning document is seriously obsolete because it doesn't match our current conditions of where we thought we would be in 2016. So a Water Master Plan update is something that we like to see cities update approximately every 5 years, but due to the recession, budget cuts, very much slowdown in growth, that has been delayed until 2015. And so we're finishing that up now with very different projections that we were going to see from 2005. It is nice to see, though, we are getting some development coming back into the city, a nice breath of fresh air from where we've been in the past few years. And then we'll present some information. Nicola will come up and present information on the 2015 Urban Water Management Plan. and she's our expert in the company on that, so ask her some hard questions. And me the easy ones, of course. So why does the city do a water master plan? First of all, we really want to identify the infrastructure that supports the new general plan. They kind of work hand in hand. As Derek mentioned, we kind of go back and forth. The city kind of sets a vision for where you want to head, and then we go back and say, okay, well, what would be needed to support that? And we say, well, here's what's needed to support that. And the general plan says, okay, well, we're good with these parts of that, but we're not as good with these parts of that, so let's tweak the general plan. So there's some back and forth that happens as to what's realistic versus what are those, really far-reaching goals and vision statements that cities develop. And so we work back and forth, and we do these hand in hand. That's why the general plan's being updated right now, as well as the water plan and the sewer plan. We really want to look at evaluating the water system for both upgrade and rehab needs, things that are already existing in place, infrastructure that you have that may be aged, may be undersized, there may be new regulations that require us to change it, and we need to go in and do rehabilitation or upgrade facilities. And then we need to plan for future water needs. Supply on where's the water going to come from, how are we going to treat it if it's needed to be treated, how do we store it in the system to be ready to be used by the city, and then how do we distribute it out to those customers, both residential customers as well as other customers in the city. So the Water Master Plan is also a big, long, lengthy document. It's broken up into all kinds of categories. We start with an existing water system description. Where are you today? Capture that. Then we talk about, well, what are your level of service goals? Are you okay providing water that just trickles out when people turn on the sink, or do you want to have a certain level of pressure so that you don't get complaints from people when they take a shower and they can't get the shampoo out of their hair, right? Those are real calls that cities get all the time when you don't meet certain level of service goals. So what are our goals we're trying to meet is where we start. Then we look at both what our current water demands are in the system and our projected water demands based on general plan growth projections. And we evaluate our water supply. California, of course, in the drought really has magnified this issue of who has water and who doesn't have water. We've seen the articles about how Southern California is coming up and buying islands because they're trying to get more water, right? It's a scarce resource in our state, scarce resource even in Northern California, which we used to think of ourselves as water plentiful, right? We're not going to even meter water because we don't need to. We have so much of it. Things have really changed. And so now we have a scarcity issue, and cities that have good water supply portfolios are in great positions. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Then we also develop a hydraulic water model. How do we get water from wherever we're pulling it from to the various customers? We've updated and calibrated that model to make sure it matches what's going out there in the system, so we can then use it to identify what infrastructure we need to upgrade, improve, or add to meet the projected demands. We then also do an infrastructure condition assessment. We look at things like your tanks and your pump stations, and your biggest asset on the water side is your water treatment plant, and say, hey, what do we need to do to those infrastructure pieces to project into the future and meet those goals? And then we develop a short and long-range capital improvement program to identify the issues and address them over time. And then finally, we say, okay, well, that all translates into dollars over a period of time. What's feasible from a financial perspective, from a rate perspective, from a growth perspective, and then there's some back and forth between what we can afford, what we want to afford and put on our ratepayers versus what needs to happen and the timing of those infrastructure needs. So the existing system consists of your water treatment plant, which is right up here in the north. It pulls off of the Sacramento River and then feeds your system all the way down to the south. The water treatment plant is called the George Christoph Water Treatment Plant. You also have almost 200 miles of pipelines throughout the city, all the way up to 54 inches in diameter. You have 9 storage tanks, 10 booster pump stations, and 3 groundwater wells that right now only serve as emergency backup. So your entire potable water system is completely surface water, which is a great thing, because in the old days, when I was at the commissioning of the naming of the George Christoph Water Plant, they talked about the old days in West Sacramento and the water quality when it was all groundwater. Very challenging groundwater quality here in West Sacramento and Davis and Woodland, all on the west side of the Sacramento River, very common issues. So you guys have had a surface water plant for a number of years, and Woodland and Davis are just catching up. So they're now going to have their surface water plant to address some of their water quality issues that they have as well. So it's a great water supply, very high-quality water. We also talk about regulations in the Water Master Plan, meeting all your water quality regulations, have for a long time. It's a very well-run plant, and you should be very proud of it. So if we look at those level of service criteria, the Water Master Plan defines the goals and the criteria. Of course, we need to meet federal, state, and local water quality regulations. And then, of course, we need to meet fire flow, because this isn't just a source of drinkable water, it's also a source of fire protection, and a very important one. And so we work hand in hand with the fire department to set the level of service goals as we move forward. So there's been lots of meetings with them.
Just a quick question. Those
Sure.
3 wells, can they actually supply the entire city in case of some sort of catastrophic something?
Yeah, so the answer is no, on the short answer. But if you have a catastrophic event, there's a notification system that would be put in place, and all residents would be asked to minimize the amount of water they're using to the absolute minimum. You'd obviously not be watering your lawns, so that it can be used for fire flow as a primary source, and flushing toilets and drinking water for public health protection. So it's kind of a balance of bringing down those demands to a critical level and bringing wells like that on.
Where are those wells located?
I'll let Dan talk about that one.
The 2 wells in Southport, right on the Touchstone area right there. Yeah, they're 1974 wells. The quality is really poor. We use it for irrigation.
Probably close to my well.
Yeah, you really
Having grown
wouldn't want
up
to turn them
around
on.
here, I
so
can tell you, the water doesn't taste great.
It would be an emergency, for sure.
So we looked at population growth because that drives consumption. And so these are the projected population growth from the general plan. Assumes about a 2.7% annual population growth. And then that translates then into water demand. And so what we're looking at here is, on the bottom axis is just our time, and we went out to 2035 with a big guess out here at 2040. And then demand is on this axis. That's in millions of gallons per day. And so that's what we need to make sure we supply. So if we talk about kind of 3 major categories of water demand. First one we call average day demand. So if we take the entire amount of water we use in a year, and we divide it by 365 days, that's our average daily demand. And that's shown in green. So the solid line is actual demand, and then the dashed line is projected demand. But as John showed in his sewer model, in order for people to flush toilets and send things down his way, they need to use the water first, which means we have changes in demand throughout our day and changes in our demand throughout our season especially, because even when it doesn't make it into John's sewer system, it does make it onto our lawns in the summer. So it doesn't show up in the sewer model, but it does show up in the water demand model. So we have a max day that we also have, and that's basically the maximum amount of demand in a given 24-hour period throughout the year. And that's shown in blue. And you can see that that has varied significantly more than our average day demand. And some of that is due a lot to the recession. Back in 2010, people really cut back. Also, there were a lot of empty lots. And so people didn't use any water on those lots, turned off irrigation, and a similar projection. While it's not a water supply issue, we also have something called peak hour demand. And that's really where it ties into, throughout a 24-hour period, that diurnal demand. And we use storage in the system to make up that peak hour demand. The max day demand we use to size our water supply. So our treatment plant is designed to meet our max day, and then any variation above that or below that gets taken up by the storage in the distribution system, and so we can just pull and draw and fill to meet those individual hourly demands.
So these projected demands are just based up on data through 2013, not for the last 2 years? Is that correct?
Yes, we started similar to the sewer plan, we started the Water Master Plan back in 2014. So this was the most recent data we had was 2013. And then what happened was, as they did some testing, we also need to do testing. The way that we do water demand testing in your hydraulic system is we flush hydrants. We turn them on, we basically open them wide up. And then we watch the pressures throughout the system and how it adapts and how your pump stations turn on and turn off to meet those demands, and we model them and build that into the calibration of our hydraulic model. Well, in 2014, we started in the summer, And the city said, you know what, we really can't use water flushing out in the middle of summer in a drought. So we were put on pause for 6 to 9 months until we could get into the late winter months and do that testing. And so then that pushed us back. But we already, during that time, did all of the water demand analysis and based everything you see here on that.
And I guess my second question then is the average daily demand, has that gone down then in the last 2 years in response to the drought? And to what extent did you consider drought prevention measures?
Yes.
That residents are putting into new faucets, new toilets into their homes, into the projections through 2035?
Yes, and we're going to cover those questions in the Urban Water Management Plan portion because it really covers what are called demand management measures, DMMs. And so Nicola can show you the kind of numbers that you guys have seen over the last couple of years in response to the drought. So if you don't mind just holding off just a little bit, we'll get there. Thank you. Any other questions on this? Okay. So water supply, Derek mentioned that water supply, you would think that a drop in the Sacramento River is a drop in the Sacramento River, but it turns out it's not. There are all kinds of different drops in the Sacramento River, and you're only allowed to take certain drops, sort of. So you have to have a contract to take water off of the Sacramento River, and you can only take it off in so much and only so often and only under certain conditions. And depending on the contract terms, it dictates what you can do. The city has 3 current water supply contracts, and these 3 cover, I think, about 50 pages of the water supply master plan. It's an incredibly complex system in California because of the scarcity issue and the legal issues. It's very challenging, but there's a good news story here for the city. So you have a State Water Resources Control Board water right permit. That allows you to take water from January to June and September through December. It's subject to what are called Term 91 limits. It's just one of those regulatory requirements based on certain conditions. That contract can be limited under certain conditions that occur in the state. And it allows you to take up to 18,350 acre feet per year. So if you take an acre of land, put a foot of water on it, and you take 18,350 of those, that's what you can take in any given year through that contract off the Sacramento River. You have a U.S. Bureau of Reclamation contract that allows you a maximum of 23,600 acre feet per year, and that is subject to curtailment. So they can come in, the Bureau can say, I'm sorry, we're going to only give you X amount of your allocation this given year based on the water that's sitting up in the dams, and so that one is variable as well. The unique one that you have is called the North Delta Water Agency contract, and this is geographically based. It doesn't cover the entire city, but the entire city south of about the UP Railroad line can use North Delta Water Agency water. And this is a very, very reliable water supply. There's actually no specific limitation in acre feet per year that you can use from this contract in any year. So it's a very reliable supply, both in normal years and in dry years. So, and then we talked about the 3 wells you don't use for potable water right now. So this portfolio you have, just like in the stock market, the more diversified you are, the better off you are to protect yourself under certain conditions. You have a relatively diverse portfolio here of water compared to a lot of the cities in Northern California. And especially that North Delta Water contract is pretty unique. So you're in a very good position here to be able to adapt to changing condition each year. The city makes decisions on, okay, how much of this water are we going to be using, how much of this water are we going to be using, this water from the 3 different contracts that you have.
Really quickly, can you provide a conversion from acre feet to gallons or millions of gallons?
Yes, I'll do that with my calculator while Nicola's talking, and I'll give that to you.
Just to compare apples to apples
Go
for
ahead.
this.
Dan's
to
got
the,
it.
1 acre foot's about 350,000 gallons.
Sorry, how many?
1 acre foot,
Mm-hmm.
it's about 350,000 gallons, give or take. So that puts it in connotation for you.
Okay. So we have more than enough contract supply for what we're currently using?
We do, and we actually made it really well through the drought this year because of North Delta.
Okay, total? Okay, about 61 million gallons of availability. So we did also do a hydraulic model. We developed the model, and basically, the reason we do this is to run all kinds of models to make sure we can meet both current demands, any fire flow demands, and future demands. So we developed the model. You had what was called a skeletonized model, which was kind of a very basic, just the large diameter pipes. We took that and put every single pipe into the system now, into your new hydraulic model, and then we calibrated it using that fire flow testing that I mentioned earlier to make sure it's accurate, because if you don't have an accurate model, your model's going to give you bad output. It allowed us to identify existing and future system deficiencies and then recommend improvements to meet those areas. So you can see in general, I grabbed just a single chart here, output. And so down here you can see this is showing pressures. So we set a certain pressure criteria for a level of service. And you can see that under the given conditions that we ran this particular model on, above 45 PSI is green, and you can see almost the entire city is green, with just a little bit of orange kind of in this area, which is expected.
The end of the line, pretty much?
Yeah, right. And there's some elevation changes there too, I think. And so we run this model under all kinds of different scenarios: average day, max day, average day plus a fire in certain areas, and we know where all your hydrants are from your GIS system, and so we run those all over different scenarios, and then kind of come out with, okay, based on this, here are the areas that we have some concerns on. And then we go in and say, okay, well, what if we upsize this pipe from an 8-inch to a 12-inch? Or what if we added a new main down this street? Or what if we added a new pump station? How can we fix this in the most economical way? And so we go through that scenario. We also look at the water system capacity. So we also look at to understand what can the water treatment plant do from a capacity point of view. Is it going to meet your current demands, and will it meet your future demands? And then we look at tanks and booster pump stations both inside the plant and outside the plant to get the water around. We combine that with the hydraulic modeling recommendations, and here is what has come out at this point, recommendations in your system. So this matches not just what any existing deficiencies that may have been identified, but also future growth to meet those general plan goals. So we're showing that you need about another 12 million gallons of storage by 2035, and that can be done in 6 new water storage tanks. All of your storage tanks in the city are ground storage tanks, and so you see those around, especially you'll see them most evident in kind of new developments, especially down in Southport, the Bridgeway Lake tanks, and down there where you guys built those tanks, got a little bit of development and then it stopped. So those tanks sit, very apparent down there, waiting for that new growth to come, which now seems to be on its way, hopefully. We also identified about 7 miles of improvements in pipelines to meet fire flow requirements. Some additional miscellaneous transmission improvements just to get water around the city to meet both pressure and flows, and then some improvements at the water treatment plant. The water treatment plant was most recently upgraded, expanded in about 2004. So it's getting up there in age now. It's over 10 years. And some of the things, while preventative maintenance is done on an ongoing basis, there's some a little bit larger projects that are on the horizon now moving forward.
Is that, I know in the document that we were given, it said that it had the capacity to treat 58 million gallons per day. Is that projected to increase with any retrofits, or is that?
Good question. So the capacity of the treatment plant was shown to be able to meet beyond the 2035 water demands. The only variable in that could be some large industrial users that may come in, large water users. We've planned for industrial users to come in, but let's say there are more food processing facilities that are high water users that are even higher than we had projected. So you always want to go back and kind of check your calculations when those come in and use this model and look at your water supply. But right now, given pretty conservative assumptions, that water treatment plant is currently sized to meet your demands through at least 2035. So any of the improvements that we're showing at the treatment plant are just to maintain that capacity.
Okay. Because it was, what was it, 12 million that we're using right now? And then with the additional, I forget where were we, the last graphic?
Yes.
I mean, there's still plenty of.
There is. And so the 12 million gallons is your average day, but the treatment plant needs to meet maximum day. So the numbers that you're currently providing are higher than that out of the treatment plant. And that's, I think we're we still had a good fair bit of headroom at 2035 in that capacity. So we developed a schedule and a cost for the recommended projects. And so you can see the various categories. We have fire flow improvements, capacity improvements, tank and pump stations, water main replacements, and existing tank and pump stations rehab. That's the last category. We broke it into 4 phases in 5-year increments. So the first phase is 2016 to 2020, 2021 to 2026, and so on until 2035. And you can see significant amount of work early on in kind of the top 3 categories, some fire flow improvements that we identified, some existing areas that need some attention, capacity improvements, just mostly in transmission mains, upsizing to meet those level of service goals, and then new tank and pump stations. That's to mostly meet developer-driven projects. So as part of those developer-driven projects, the city uses the hydraulic model, puts it into the system, says, okay, here are the improvements that are necessary to support this. They go back to the developer and say, here's what you're going to need to provide in order for your development to be approved. And the city works with the developer to get that put into place. So this doesn't mean it's necessarily all being funded only by the city. It may be funded not just by rates of existing, but by developers or other mechanisms. Any questions on this? I'll say that this is our current CIP. Because we have to move through the financial portion of the master planning project, there's going to be some more back and forth, and so this may not be the ultimate final numbers, but this is where we've landed in our initial cut to meet the requirements. And the financial analysis is upcoming. I think right now there's a workshop to kind of present our initial findings of the water master plan in late July to the council, and then further down the road, we'll move into developing the specific rates, if any impacts, changes need to be made in those or not to meet the CIP. So that'll follow on over the next 6 to 9 months. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions or comments, concerns on this portion, and then we can have Nicola come up and present.
I guess we're good.
Very good. Thank you.
I guess I do have one question.
I guess we're not good.
So what?
Sure.
So we only have the one water treatment plant for the city. Let's say that goes down, let's say that breaks in some way. Is our current contingency just the storage that we have throughout the city to take us through that being repaired? Are there other, should we be thinking about something else for backup to that single plant? Beyond the wells that have horrible water quality?
Right. Yeah, so reliability and redundancy are kind of 2 key words that we use when we talk about water supply, because it is such a critical asset and infrastructure piece to a city's function. So the water treatment plant, while it's a single plant, is made up of lots of pieces, parts that take it out of the river, treat it, and put it into the distribution system. And there's no one real single point of failure in that treatment plant. So for instance, for the intake pumps, there's multiple pumps out there. So if one pump fails, there's always a backup ready to go that can be turned on to meet that capacity. So we always have a backup in any key area of the treatment plant, that when one goes down, we don't lose any capacity. If we lose 2, we may lose a little capacity, but the chances of that happening with a good preventative maintenance program are minimal. So we see that all the way through the treatment plant and out into the distribution system, all the way out to storage. Storage in the system, from a fiscal point of view and a geographic point of view, you can't provide enough storage in a system to meet any long-term needs. It's really meant to make you last a few days. And if you have a major problem, it's not going to be enough to get you beyond that. So there have been some discussions. We always try and kind of explore all kinds of different areas in the water system, and there has been discussions over many years about, hey, should there be another straw in the water in the Sacramento, somewhere else, maybe down south, those types of things. To date, there hasn't seemed to be a need to do that. They feel very comfortable. We feel very comfortable that it's reliable. But a catastrophic event can always occur. Huge seismic event could occur that may take the treatment plant down, but the chances of it, if one was taken down, the chances of it taking both down are pretty high. So I'm not sure you get much more reliability under a seismic event by having 2 of them instead of 1. So we try and do it within the plant with lots of different equipment, high degree of maintenance to make sure they're always operating in a good manner and as reliable as possible. Any other, you want to add to that, Dan?
I would just add that we also have generator power there where we can, in an electrical event or lack of electrical, we can run full 58 million gallons in and out of the plant. So we basically designed this plant and built it around the concept of it is the only source. So let's put reliability into it. So that's already been accounted for.
You're welcome. Thanks.
My name's Nicola Fontaine, and I'm working on the urban water management plan for the city. I just have a presentation for you. Oops. Oh, yeah. Pushing other buttons here. Oh. So I think this is. Oops, this is the, let me go forward. Oops. Okay, so the state requires urban water management plans from suppliers servicing more than 3,000 connections or supplying more than 3,000 acre-feet of water annually. And these must be filed with the state every 5 years. And the city has been filing these for several years. So this plan that we've just done is an update to the 2010 urban water management plan. And the purpose of the urban water management plans is to maintain efficient use of urban water supplies, to promote conservation programs and policies, and to ensure that sufficient water supplies are available for future beneficial use. It also provides a mechanism for response during drought conditions. So for development of the plan, the city worked with all the departments within the city worked to provide input to us for developing the UWMP. So that included the Department of Public Works and the Fire Department, and the Planning Department helped with growth, percent annual growth projections, and then the City Environmental Services helped with demand management measures and water conservation. In addition to that, the UWMP also requires coordination and outreach to outside agencies. So the city notified the Dunnigan Water District, Yolo County, the Regional Water Authority, Department of Water Resources, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, the North Delta Water Agency, and then the general public to participate in the public hearing and review the document when it's ready for the public review period. So I'm going to throw another unit of measure in here. So this table is in 100 cubic feet, and there's 748 gallons in 100 cubic feet. So the value shown for 2015 is your actual water demands for that year, and then the projected values from 2020 to 2040 are based on the population projections that Chris had mentioned. And then we've also included the water losses were estimated at 13% from the treatment plant to the customers. And then along with that, we also use what we'd say is the target water usage per person. So that's how these numbers came about.
What is the water loss? Is that just in the system?
Yep, just in the system. And they're not fully metered now, so this is sort of it's an estimate based on connections that are metered and then projected to the city, portions of the city that aren't metered, and what the losses would be expected.
Before you, what's the target for the per capita water usage?
That's on this one. The 2020 target is 233 gallons per capita per day. So to determine these targets, we calculated a baseline from 2001 to 2010 based on historical population and water usage, and that resulted in an average baseline for that 10 years of 291 gallons per capita per day.
All those are the period of time where water usage was pretty wasteful?
Yes.
So, I mean, what about using, like right now it's 104 gallons per capita per day?
176. Yep, so
Oh, I'm just reading off the state website.
Oh, yeah, the calculations for the Department of Finance populations are off, so you have to calculate your population projections a little differently.
Oh,
That's
okay.
why these numbers are a little bit different than that. But the actual usage based on your metered, or your production and your population for 2015, it was 176. And so the calculation for 2020 was at based on 80% of that 291 gallons per capita per day. The 2020 target was 233, and then the interim target that you were supposed to meet in 2015 is halfway in between that, and that was 262 gallons per capita per day. So you can see you easily met that with the drought conditions. There was no chance you'd not meet that 2015 goal. So, and you even met the 2020 target in 2015, so that showed how effective your conservation efforts were for the city and how the public acted on the conservation measures as well.
Before we leave this page, so according to the state, if you look at the Yolo County only, the monthly gallons per capita per day, for example, for Woodland is 72.
Oh, yes, that's, what you're looking at isn't that the Regional Water Authority?
Yeah.
And it's just residential.
Right.
So these numbers include industrial, commercial, and
Well, that's what I'm,
institutional.
and ours is significantly higher per capita, roughly same size city. So what I'm suggesting is that if they're
Oh, I see what you're saying.
80, 72 gallons per person, and we're over 100, what are we doing to get ourselves closer to, the lower level versus the higher level?
With different demand management measures that the city is implementing, and then the water efficient landscape ordinance will make a big difference. That's very detailed and comprehensive, should really help with water use.
Well, the reason I'm bringing it up is that, using the numbers from years when people were leaving their hose on all day, literally, isn't as realistic as it would be for the last year or two, when people were actually trying to conserve water.
Yeah, that's true. I definitely worry about people just falling into that bad habits as soon as they think the drought's over.
They're there.
Yeah.
They're there already, again.
And I'm not sure if Woodland is fully metered. Do you know? I'm not sure.
I think they are,
Usually
so is
when
Davis.
cities are fully metered, then the people don't use as much water. 'Cause they're kind of shocked by their bills when
Which
they.
would lead me to ask, when are we going to be?
The current plan is 2019 to be completely metered for the
And
city.
then, I know this is kind of off, then, considering there's so many areas already fully metered, wouldn't it behoove us to turn on the meters that are already installed so that we could account for even greater conservation for those areas, and instead of waiting 4 years or?
Absolutely. We didn't predict that there was going to be a drought condition, and when the meter program actually started getting going, because I was the one that implemented it, started getting going, we had a projection and a resource allocation that we needed to provide to get everybody metered. So the law actually states that two things is, one, that the city needs to be metered, place a physical meter, and it also needs to be consumption-based. So the program, when I started it, it was directly focused on construction or placements of meters. So we've been going through that process, and we should be done in the next year or so. And then there's discussions internally to how to convert, how do we phase it, and how do we do it on, how do we start turning customers on. Council directions was to do it at one time, at 2018, when we actually completed all the installations. So now we're getting close to that. We're in discussions to how is the best way to do it versus turning on phases in the north to south, or complete overhaul. The internal system has to be set up currently to handle this volume, and as well, not only the volume, but also the calculations and the presentation of the meter consumption to all the residents, as well as being able to financially account for it and address these issues. And if there's issues out there with the system, then we still need to have maintenance crews go out and address those issues, and we're not quite there in all those aspects. So although we're getting close to, the numbers actually say 19% metered, but we're really closer to 75% metered. But we just not turn it on. So we can't say that we're metered because we're not charging volumetric rates on those.
Well, one of the reasons I'm bringing this is that it's the old adage in business, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Absolutely.
And even for those, mine was installed last March, I still look at it, because it actually still, you can still calculate your water usage.
Absolutely.
And so even if you don't charge them, we could still instruct the individual how to look at their water usage. Because a lot of folks first off, don't even know they have a meter out in the front yard, and two, even know about the ability for them to check those, the water usage.
You're 100% right. Currently, we're in discussion of how to start rolling out that information. We have a web page that we're just creating right now. We're getting ready to send out informational mailers, that we just started that process, so
Okay.
you're 100% right.
Sorry to just
Yeah.
interrupt the flow here.
Have to send out directions on how to program your sprinkler system too. People,
The what?
sprinkler systems, people don't know how to program their sprinkler
Oh,
systems
God,
either.
don't even bring that one up, yeah.
So as you pointed out, the gallons per capita per day was much higher in that baseline year, and even the 5-year baseline from 2006 to 2010 was 271. So that's quite a bit higher than what was achieved in 2015, and even the target for 2020 of 233.
Oh, sorry to ask another question. I'm going to be Karen this time. What would be the percentage of residential versus industrial water usage? Just that,
I don't know
if there's a
that.
ballpark or something. So, for example, the per capita, this is the residential, but
Oh, yes.
you're talking about a
It's-
total, your numbers was including the or industrial?
Including industrial,
Oh, okay,
commercial.
so we already
and
have it,
institutional. Yes.
that's the number, okay.
Yep.
I was just curious what the percentage of residential water usage versus industrial in the city.
We have the numbers, trying to look it up right now.
Oh, okay.
Well, what is that, 271 and then minus the 104 residential usage on the state?
Yeah, that's probably,
Yeah,
that's
so-
probably close. And the UWMP, the Planning Act does allow you some cities to subtract that process water from industries to get, to recalculate your gallons per capita per day.
Oh, okay.
But the city isn't a disadvantaged community, and it doesn't meet a few other requirements, so you can't do that. So as Chris mentioned, you have a very robust water supply portfolio. Upcoming years, the USBR contract expires in 2019, so the negotiations for that will be ongoing, and there'll be potential to increase an allocation for that. And then plans to use that as a primary supply from June to September, because I don't know if you remember from Chris's slide, that State Water Resource Control Board permit was only January to June and then September to December. So using this as your primary supply during those summer months would help the portfolio. And then using the North Delta water contract as a backup supply. And then potentially developing groundwater wells in the future, just to have some additional backup supply and redundancy. Or using it for landscape, so you're offsetting the potable use that you would use for landscape irrigation. And because of that great North Delta contract you have, all your supply exceeds the demands in all the different kind of water years that we've analyzed. So during a normal water year, say 2010, your supply exceeds your demand, and then in a dry year like 2015, your supply still exceeds demands. And then for multiple dry years, which could be 2013 to 2015, you still have more than enough supply to meet your demands.
Excuse me, what's the geographic area that North Delta Water District
It's everything south of the Union Pacific Railroad line
to
the city limit, right?
Oh, okay.
All the way to the,
I mean, it's not part of the actual delta.
no,
Okay.
I don't think so.
Well, the reason I was bringing it up is that the reference about islands being purchased and but WD, so I was wondering
Yeah.
if they're going to be, purchasing islands and get senior water rights, what does that do to the North Delta if that's part
The
of
only
it?
thing I would add, there's a North Delta and a Central Delta and a South Delta water district. It goes all the way down through the Delta. So right now, for our concerns, it's just the city limits.
Okay, cool.
And it's such a reliable source that you can, so on a single dry year, you could have more of that feeding that portion of the city and using those other permits in different ratios to cover all these different dry year conditions. So like if you saw a graph of this, there would be the North the supply would increase, while the other ones are decreasing because of curtailments and things like that. And it provides extra water for the city to use for transfers to other utilities. So another component of the urban water management plan is a water shortage contingency plan. And some cities have this in their ordinances, in their city code, and then other cities have it as a part of the urban water management plan. So this, for the city of West Sacramento, it's going to be part of the urban water management plan, and it is modeled after the Regional Water Authority recommendations. The city does have a no waste water ordinance in their city code that's in place at all times. And then the fire department provided us with some fire district policies to include, similar to like the hydrant flushing and just activities that the fire districts would do during water shortages. So the plan has a set of stages. You can see in the table there at the bottom. It goes 1 through 4, and it's based on the percent reduction in the supply that's available. And then each condition has a name for it that the city can then implement that stage and get the public to do this certain restrictions and prohibitions by each stage. So the plan would say, like, a no waste ordinance would be no free-flowing hoses. But during maybe stage 2, you'd only be able to water 2 hours a day, and it'd have to be between a certain time of day and only 2 days a week, things like that. So those stages are more detailed, depending on what the city implements.
We're on 3, right? We're currently at stage 3?
I thought it was just
2, 3?
relaxed.
As of last Wednesday, we're at stage 0.
Oh, 0, okay.
Yeah.
That's really relaxed. I was thinking it was stage 1.
What's the practical effect of having the contingency plan in just the water plan as opposed to the city code?
It's might be easier to amend in the urban water management plan. I'm not positive on like which way is easier to amend.
It's also required, I think, per the water management plan to get, for a CVP contract, but also allows the city manager to enact it on a basis, the emergency basis.
Whereas if it was in the code, it would take the council to enact it, or?
The code may cover, I'm not positive, but I think the code may just cover like a normal condition, where if this condition could actually could be implemented if we had something happen on the river where the water quality was poor, we couldn't treat it, and we had to reduce our water usage. We could actually enact this condition other than a drought. So this is kind of what it entails. I think it's part of the plan, always has been, so.
So it is something you could build into your code in the future if you wanted to, but I think it's easier to amend it in the plans than it would be to amend the code. And then the last component I'm going to talk about is the demand management measures. And the urban water management plan, this 2015 guidelines, there's 6 demand management measures. So the first one is the water waste prevention ordinance, which Dan just mentioned. It's in place at all times under normal conditions, and that's in your city code. And the second one is metering, and the numbers I had, it was 19%, but Derek was just saying it's much greater than that, but it's planned to be completed in 2019. And then the third is conservation pricing, and that's when everybody would start paying the metered rates. And I believe the city was going to provide a comparison of metered and flat rates to customers and then switch them to metered conservation pricing.
Is it going to be the tiered rates that some of the other cities use?
Currently, we have a rate system. It's tiered, and so it's through it was a finance department came through, and they changed our rate system in 2011 and went through 2015. So part of the water master plan is we're going through a financial analysis, and we're going to present it to council, and council's going to guide us to how they want to do the water rate structure. So I can't really answer that question at the moment.
Well, I was just, I have some in-laws down in San Luis Obispo, and they actually had a court case against the tiered rates, and
San Juan
I haven't
Capistrano,
actually spoke to,
correct.
so I'm not sure what the status was.
Yeah, absolutely. We took that into consideration as we're moving forward to how the tiered rates and how the court systems not the results of the court system, but the judge's rulings on them. And so we'll present to council how we plan to go forth on that. It's kind of a unique situation because you can't actually charge for consumption that you're not using.
All right. Thank you.
And the fourth demand management measure is the public education and outreach, and the city has a well-developed program in place. So the UWMP has sections on this, and it will talk about what the city's done for the past 5 years on each of these measures and what they plan to do. Then the fifth is to assess and manage distribution losses, and once the city's fully metered, this can be better quantified. And the city already has a good water pipeline replacement program in place, so again, once it's metered, it'll be really easy, it'll be a lot easier to find leaks and manage that. And the sixth is a water conservation program, and the city has a fully funded program with 3 staff members and a water conservation coordinator. And then the state also recognizes other demand management measures that don't fit into these 6 categories. And the city has a great water efficient landscape ordinance. They have the closed washer rebate, irrigation efficiency rebate, and then also on their website, they have the links to the DWR Save Our Water rebates as well. So the city's doing a great job with their demand management measures. So in summary, the city met the 2015 target water use. They also met the 2020 target water use. They're going to complete the metering in 2019, and then can quantify distribution system losses and be able to track warnings and violations and get after the water wasters. And then continue to work with the public to maintain the efficient use of supplies. And it'd be important to maintain that water use to meet the 2020 target. So I was just looking, the average between 2013 and 2015 was 213 gallons per capita per day. So there's a chance if people stop conserving that it would be hard to meet the 2020, but I don't know. I think that would, hopefully everybody will continue to conserve. Well, that's all I had to say. Anybody have any questions?
I think I asked all of them.
Great,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commission.
Well, that's it, huh? And then, thank you very much. Great presentations. Do we have any or Environment or Utilities Commission's calendar?
The next meeting is August 8th,
Oh, okay.
Monday.
And do we have any reports from the city staff? I guess that would.
No, not this time.
And future agenda item requests by the Environment and Utilities Commission? That would be no. Then, do we have a motion to adjourn? Okay, we got a motion, do we?
Second?
Second, all in favor?
Yes.
Okay.
Aye.